AI, by its definition, generates the average. And the average is pretty good to get started and may be what your customers need.
Are you saying the A in AI is average intelligence?
It is average intelligence. So the goal here is not to move faster towards the average, it's to move faster towards a thing that is really exceptional for your users. I think if you look at the PM role, there are things that can move at the speed of AI, and there's things that have to move at the speed of humans.
Today, I'm joined by Ravi Mehta. Ravi is a senior product executive with experience leading product organizations for globally recognized brands like TripAdvisor, Facebook, and Tinder. Ravi is also the co-creator of Reforge's AI strategy program. Currently, he's a full-time product strategy advisor and investor working with some of the most well-known consumer brands and fast-growing startups. Ravi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to Product in Practice. I have been wanting to have you on the show for so long, especially because you, like I mentioned in the intro, worked on the creation of the AI strategy program at Reforge. What kind of drove this? Why did what kind of triggered the creation of this program?
So Brian, who's the CEO of Reforge, and I created the course together. And what we saw was that there was a lot of course material helping people understand AI, either to use AI within their own workflows or to use AI within their own products. But there wasn't a lot of material talking about the competitive environment that we're in right now with AI. The last couple of years have moved incredibly fast for companies. You have these new big AI labs like OpenAI and Anthropic. You have the big companies like Adobe and Microsoft and others really leaning into AI. And so a lot of product managers and product leaders are thinking to themselves, how do we win in this environment? What is the right way to integrate AI? How do we stand out? How do we make sure that our use cases don't get subsumed into these really broad horizontal products like ChatGPT and Claude? And so we created the program to help people answer that question. And so the program consists of 4 different parts. The first one is really an assessment of how vulnerable are you to AI-based disruption. It turns out some companies are very vulnerable, and we've already seen cases of that. So we've seen traffic to companies like Stack Overflow and Chegg really decrease because a lot of what people were going to those products for, you can get quickly and easily through things like ChatGPT and Claude. But we've also seen other companies move more slowly. So Airbnb is a really good example. Brian Chesky recently said that their AI strategy is going to take a couple of years to play out. And so what we wanted to do is identify, well, why are some companies in one bucket, other companies are in a different bucket? Where do you stand as a company? And then how do you need to build out your AI strategy in order to meet the needs of the market and meet the needs of your users? We then go into market strategy, so figuring out where you're going to play, specifically the product strategy, how to use AI to identify and solve for use cases that your customers will have. And then eventually, really importantly, execution strategy. AI is probabilistic rather than deterministic. The models are constantly changing. There's non-trivial marginal costs related to using these. And so understanding when to use AI, when not to use AI is really important. And then also understanding what are the specific dynamics around AI. How do you create something that works well, that's consistent, that gets better over time, that meets the trust and safety needs that your users have? And so our goal was really to create a course that's not just about the implementation of AI, but really thinking strategically, what does it mean for your business and how can you win?
And how was the uptake of the course? Like, how did people respond to it? And the reason why I'm asking this is there isn't a lot of there's a lot of content out there. I don't know if there's a lot of quality content out there. And I've been following what you've produced in terms of content for a while. How are people engaging with the content? And second part of the question is, you just recently did the first cohort, right? Like, what are some of the questions people are asking? So I'm assuming that in the first cohort, you had product managers, product leaders. What's top of mind for these people?
So the first cohort went really well. We launched it in April. We've got the next cohort coming in October. The reaction has been great. We had 1,000+ people enroll in the program. The first cohort was 4 weeks long. We had 4 fantastic guests, each of whom basically pull the curtain back and help us understand how they approach AI. In the first week, we had Justin Ferris from GitLab, who talked about a really interesting competitive environment where they're competing directly against GitHub. Microsoft's leaning very hard into AI, so how does GitLab create a strategy that's differentiated and where they can win? And he talked about the importance of the enterprise, the specific needs that the enterprises have. We had Jeff Chow from Miro, Laura Burkhauser from Descript.
Oh, we have Laura on the show
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
I love that.
And so great set of guests, really good set of conversations that I think are conversations that people need to have and aren't having anywhere else. We got great questions. A lot of people really valued the disruption risk assessment, which is the first part of the course. So we've actually released that publicly. And now there's a tool available on the Reforge site where you can go in. There's 18 different factors that you can go through for your particular product and for your particular customer and understand where you stand with AI and what that means for how you need to think strategically about what's next for your company.
I love that. So going back to this first cohort, so one of the questions I'm really interested in is, like, if you think about a lot of product leaders today in larger organizations, this is probably not true of startups, but if you think about, like, a mid-market to large enterprise company, a lot of product leaders I speak to are trying to understand how can they raise the level of AI fluency in their organization, right? So you hear more and more the use of this term AI fluency. What are 3 ways you would suggest these product leaders raise the AI fluency across their org?
I think the first one, it's very basic, is just access. Give everyone access to whatever your preferred LLM is, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or others, and encourage people to use it for, if they're writing specs or if they're working with engineers to write code or if they're working with Figma. The first step in really building AI fluency is actually learning by doing. And I think a lot of times there's some trepidation about what's the right way, what's the wrong way, am I going to get good results? And just eliminating the friction that it takes for someone to go from sort of being outside and window shopping to actually using the tools is really important. The second one, I think, is to enforce that you expect teams to be working with AI and to challenge teams to answer the question of how could we do this significantly faster with AI. It's not true that everything is going to run 10x faster, but there are particular cases, whether it's prototyping and doing product discovery through prototyping, which we'll talk more about, whether it's spec writing, whether it's the design phase, whether it's the actual building phase, where it is possible to move significantly faster. And I've seen there's kind of 3 cohorts of people within companies. There's the people who are the evangelists and they love AI and they're full in and they're learning every day and they're playing out with that's me as well. I absolutely love it. I'm a kid in a candy shop with this stuff. Yeah. And so those are great people to tap into and they can help spread that fluency throughout the organization. I think there's a second cohort of people who are legitimately interested in it but don't know where to start, and that's where access and education are really important. And I think there's a third cohort of people that are very skeptical. And I understand the skepticism. AI is not going to fulfill all the hype that the tech industry has created around it, but it truly is a game-changing technology, both for the products that we build as well as how we build them. And so I think it's important to get the skeptics over their skepticism, to understand what their concerns are, but also have them dabble in AI and understand how it can fit within their workflow. I do think for people that are highly skeptical of AI and just are never AIers, they don't want to write any code with AI, they don't want to do any PRDs with AI, they're going to put themselves behind in terms of the pace that they work. So setting those expectations, giving access to the tools, providing education are all really good ways to help people move forward. And you'll often find you've got a great kernel of people within the organization that are already excited about it and can be advocates internally.
I love that. What are some of the really powerful moves you've seen PMs make when they're thinking about how can they upskill? So it's a new world out there with, this shift to, being more AI forward. And, there's a lot of product managers, senior product managers and product leaders in your community. What are some of the things you've seen people do that has a significant impact on how they show up at work and like how their work translates into value, right?
I think the biggest one is around prototyping. Mm-hmm. And so it used to be that there needed to be a fairly linear sort of sequence that something would have to go through. We get some information through product discovery, we have a hypothesis, we make a bet and say, this is something that we want to work on. Then we write a spec that has enough clarity that the designers can go and do some wireframes and then do some detailed designs. And then engineering comes in and does the architecture. Maybe it figures out, okay, what is the MVP of this? Because oftentimes in that speccing process, the aspiration of what you want to build is bigger than what the time allows. And so it's important for engineering to come in and scope things and also add to the overall direction and architecture. And then maybe you do an MVP, you test that with some users, you launch that, you get some data. And so, there's been a lot of talk in the tech industry about moving away from waterfall to more of an agile process. But for a lot of companies, their agile process is just waterfall running really, really fast.
Correct.
And now I think that's really changing. And so you can, in an hour, go from, hey, we have a particular concept to we have a working prototype that is actually testable with users where we can start to get information. And so I think one of the biggest differences is companies are moving more or working more together like a jazz band, where there's a lot of overlap in terms of responsibility. People are vibing off of each other. Of course, everyone's going to have their distinct roles. You don't want a product person who's just learning the basics of code to be writing production level code, nor do you want them to be doing production level designs. But the fact that there's this really interesting overlap between those roles means that more than ever, we can move away from an assembly line, more towards a jazz band, vibe off of each other, make sure the walls around territory are like as minimalist as possible, and build something I think that's better in the process. The other thing that I think is really important is AI by its definition generates the average. And the average is pretty good to get started and maybe what your customers need.
Are you saying the A in AI is average intelligence?
It is average intelligence, absolutely. And so, it can do sort of pretty good work, but it's not going to come up with the thing that is new and interesting and really evocative.
It might not always be one shot like we see in the demos, right?
Yeah, and absolutely not. Like the kind of one-shot prototype. I think if you're just doing one-shot prototypes and prompting and then getting a prototype and shipping that to users and expecting that to have all the answers, that's not the case, right? A really good prototype is going to take dozens or even hundreds of iterations. It's going to take time to create something. And so because AI is really good at the average, it's important for product people in particular to understand what is beyond the average, what is the outlier experience that we want to create for customers, how can we do that, and how do we factor that learning into this accelerated process. So the goal here is not to move faster towards the average, it's to move faster towards a thing that is really exceptional for your users.
I think the biggest leap anyway for a lot of professionals in product right now, I feel like, is trying to understand how do they make this shift in terms of mindset to go from I'm this product manager today, like maybe non-AI forward, or I haven't had the time to do it yet, or whatever the situational context is. How do you suggest they make this shift, like for them to work more effectively in this way? You talked about prototyping. Prototyping is a part of it. You could argue that AI can be applied across the whole product development lifecycle. But as a product manager, let's say if I'm not leaning forward enough today, what is the one thing you would advise the PMs to do today?
I think if you look at the PM role, there are things that can move at the speed of AI, and there's things that have to move at the speed of humans. And so understanding what your customers want, getting them to adopt it, getting them to understand how it fits within their workflow, taking that and creating a strategy that your company can use to create a viable business model. Those are all things that are largely moving at human speed and will for, as far as we can see into the future, versus there's things that are moving much faster, that are moving at AI speed, writing docs, creating prototypes. I think more so we'll see in design as well, that will move faster. And so I think it's really important for the product person who wants to set themselves apart is to focus on the areas that need to move at human speed and understand how you can add the most value to customer discovery, to product strategy, because those are going to be the things that move, that are going to be the most important. As these other things move faster and faster, that's going to shift the relative emphasis from building, which has always been really hard, but is going to get a lot easier and a lot faster, to the question of what to build, which has always been important. But, maybe it was like a 50-50 distribution before. Now it's going to be 90-10. 90% of your success is not going to be building. It's going to be determining what to build and making sure that that really meets your customers' needs. And so skills around product sense, around customer discovery, around strategy are more important than ever before.
A lot of people talk about taste right now. They'll talk about taste. I knew of taste as a word, but now it's become this, like, I don't know how to call it. It's just like everybody talks about taste. Right? It's a buzzword, right? So I think about taste, and people talk a lot about judgment as well. Like, what has significantly changed for taste to become a buzzword? What is the trend behind that?
The trend, I think, is that it used to be that to create something, you needed two things. You needed taste and you needed craft. So you have to have the taste of what do I want to create, and then you have to have the craft to be able to do it. So if you want to paint a painting, you have to have taste in terms of understanding what painting do I want to create that is going to achieve the goals that I have. They might be personal goals, but they might be goals in the market. But also, really importantly, you need to be able to use a brush and paints and be able to have the craft to get there. And the craft with generative AI is getting a lot easier. Now, anyone can create beautiful images, can create beautiful photographs, can create music, can create in all these different media where these large models operate. And people can argue about how good the quality is, but if we're being honest, the quality is pretty good and it will only get better. And so if craft is something that is accessible to a lot more people, then that shifts the emphasis from, it's not about just creating the thing, it's about understanding what to create. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. For product people are, essentially craftspeople around software and products. And so the emphasis is going to shift from the craft of creating the product and the day-to-day iterations around the specs and the QA and the actual building of the software, and more towards what are we going to build. And so similarly, I think in all creative fields, there's going to be this shifting window from craft has been really important. It will still be important, but its importance will be less. And the thing that will be of primary importance is taste, is knowing what you want to create, how that is going to help you achieve the goals that you have, whether those are success in the market or creating something that is really evocative for people. And so that tension between taste and craft, I think, is the thing that's really shifted with generative AI, and it's meant that taste is much more important today.
I asked you this question before when we met at the product conference in Paris, and I think it's a great question that I want to ask again here so that our audience kind of hears your thoughts about this. With AI, a lot is changing, right? So the craft of product management is changing, like product managers now have access to all these tools. You could argue that the boundaries between the crafts of product design and engineering are moving or blurring, but there are things that are not changing. Like, what do you think are the skills and the qualities of a good product manager that are not changing, or maybe should not change?
Yeah, one of the things I published a few years ago is the Product Competency Toolkit, which is a system of 12 different competencies that will help make product managers really great at their field. I won't go through all 12, but it's basically organized into 4 different areas: product execution, customer insight, product strategy, and influencing people. In some sense, all of those have something that is going to be impacted by AI, but all of them also have an element which is not going to change. The one that's going to change the most is product execution. So that consists of quality assurance and functional specification and working with engineers and designers to deliver on product. That's going to have pretty significant changes. But what, like we talked about, if you're only using AI for those things, you're going to get to the average solution. If you want something that's truly exceptional, that's going to require human intervention. And so being able to execute on beautiful, aesthetic, functional products is still going to be an advantage, even though parts of that are going to get easier. Other parts of the competencies, I think, don't change that much, and they actually get more important. Customer insight becomes more important. Customer insight is a matter of talking to customers and understanding the data that you have available, both of which will get accelerated by AI, but being able to interpret those results, to draw insight from them, to figure out what to do as a result becomes incredibly important. And then also understanding how to create really good user experiences around that is important. On the product strategy side, yes, you can go to ChatGPT or Claude. They can generate strategy documents for you. They'll have some pretty good insights, but there is an intuitive element of strategy that I don't think AI is going to replace easily, which is understanding the competitive dynamics, understanding the market, understanding how you're going to make money, understanding which channels work. There's always arbitrage opportunities in
Yes.
channels, like knowing if people are moving to TikTok, and video is a big opportunity. The AI probably isn't going to be able to understand that, because what the AI generates is sort of limited to its training data set. And if you're trying to do something strategically valuable, it's about something in the future that hasn't happened.
And like you said before, it's probabilistic, right, in the nature that it's approaching these problems. I think you'll see once in a while they have this post on LinkedIn where somebody's going to say, people need to be careful. The AI doesn't think for you. Sure, there are reasoning models. When you're in ChatGPT, it says thinking. And I think it creates this perception that the AI is this brain and it's actually like doing the thinking like a human being would do, which is like not true. What is your take on this?
I think, like most things, there's nuance. So the LLMs are incredibly good at using language to represent their take on the world. And so there's these incredibly complex models of how the world works that's embedded into our language, that's learned from all of the language that's available on the internet. And so what is our tool for thinking? It is language. And so the fact that LLMs are incredibly good at language means that they can simulate reasoning by creating these sort of linguistic chains that get them from point A to point B. But what they don't have is an underlying reasoning model, an underlying simulation of the world that they're then vetting against. And so as a result, they can create things that look and feel really good, but can be objectively wrong because they don't have that world model.
And they're very confident about it.
They're very confident about it. And so there's kind of two sides of this. You know, there's the Gary Marcus view of these are not thinking machines, they're just fancy autocomplete. I think there's the Sam Altman world, and other people that are at the big AI labs which say that this is the way that we get to AGI. I'm not sure which is, I don't think anyone is sure where things are going, but I think to say that they're fancy autocomplete does
seem reductive.
Yeah, I think it's reductive. I think having that sort of really deep, detailed understanding of linguistics is simulating thought at a high level and can be pretty useful, but it also comes with some downsides. It hallucinates, it delivers the average, it's only going to give you a result that it can deduce from its existing training data set. And we know that some of the most evocative, some of the most interesting things in the world are not things that are already in the world. They're new, and that's why they capture the imagination.
One of the things I mentioned during the intro is you're now a product advisor, right? So you're advising, startups to, fast-growing companies. What, like in the work that you do with these companies, what are some of the things you are approaching completely differently now that AI is, I want to say, broadly available?
The biggest one is product discovery. And so product discovery is this incredibly challenging process where you're going from, I don't know what people want to, and I may have some hypotheses around that, to I want to have something that has product market fit. And for people that have achieved product market fit, it's undeniable. You get this incredible pull from the market and you're struggling to keep up. And so I think a lot of people sort of convince themselves that they have product market fit because they want to achieve that, because that's an important milestone. But at the end of the day, it's not there unless it's undeniably there. And so going from that means that you're moving through this landscape of the unknown. And in the past, doing that was a relatively slow process. The whole idea of the minimum viable product was meant to accelerate that. But even with a very fast engineering team, you're typically, in the old way of things, delivering a new product to customers or a new concept to discover against once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Now I'm working with one company that went from that old model to a very AI-focused model where the product team is vibe coding new prototypes every single day. And so what they're doing is they're coding up a couple of different concepts, and they'll go to a co-working space and they'll put the product into people's hands, and they'll do a quick 10-minute interview with them and get feedback. And after they come back, they'll say, okay, here's what we learned. Let's make those changes to the prototypes. And so they've very quickly gone from, we have this pretty broad landscape of things that we were experimenting against, to we have a very clear hypothesis that we have increasing conviction around, and they're iterating much faster, and they're getting to something where they're starting to feel that pull from the market. They're having people ask, when does the product come out, or when can I talk to you about this again? And it's exciting to be able to work at that speed, especially through such an ambiguous process. Because if you can accelerate that learning cycle, that helps you go through, a really tough part of any startup is that phase when you just don't know is it going to work or not.
Yes.
It helps you get to an answer much faster.
Yeah, I love that. You talked about product market fit. Like, when do you know that this thing is actually happening to you? I had somebody describe this to me as there are so many people knocking on your front door that you're so overwhelmed, you can't deal with all of it. So I think you should know, like, unless you're reaching this level, like you might not have reached it.
If you're not sure if you have product market fit, you probably don't have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Part of this show is getting hands-on, and I actually loved having you on the show because I know you do a lot of prototyping, a lot of hacking around with all the tools that are available out there. So we talked a lot about AI prototyping in the first part of the show, and we talked about how PMs have this evolving skill set, and part of it now is going to be about how can they use these tools to actually enhance their workflows. And interestingly, you talked a little bit about context earlier. One of the things that I haven't quite seen in prototypes so far is how people use the underlying data in the prototypes. And I think this is what you wanted to talk to us today. So before we dive into the no fluff hands-on section of the show, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're going to walk through today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people approach prototyping from two different perspectives. There's spec-driven prototyping, and then there's design-driven prototyping. Spec-driven prototyping, you write up a spec, which is essentially your prompt. You take that, you put it into a prototyping tool, and that will generate an output, and then you can iterate on that output. It mirrors a lot of how we've traditionally built software, where everything starts with the spec. Design-driven prototyping, these models are remarkably good at reading images and kind of deducing from images how things should work. Mm-hmm. And so you can do a light wireframe or even a more detailed design in Figma, or maybe mock something up by sort of cutting out different pieces of different products that you like, feed that design into the tool, and then start to get a working prototype. Both of those work really well. But as we move from sort of basic prototypes into something that is more sophisticated, oftentimes a really critical step in the product development process is what is the schema of data that we're working with that ultimately drives the experience that we want. Mm-hmm. And so a new prototyping technique that I've been experimenting with is data-driven prototyping, where you say the thing that we're actually going to start with is a mock data set that follows a particular schema, and we're actually going to ask the model to create an interface for that data set, and that can often get you to a much tighter, a much more flexible, and a much more sophisticated prototype out to start. And then it's got this really nice separation between the presentation layer and the data layer, which is key to software. And so being able to iterate on something effectively is a combination of not just kind of iterating on a black box, but really understanding what is the data that is underlying our experience, what is the view of that data, and how do we iterate on both of those simultaneously to get to a user experience that works well for the customer.
I love it. Let's get started.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so this is the hands-on part of Product in Practice. I'm with Ravi. So you're going to walk us through what you call data-driven prototyping, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are we looking at?
All right, so we're going to be using two different tools. We're going to be using a prototyping vibe coding tool. There's a number of them out there. There's V0 and Lovable and Bolt. I really like this one. It's a newer one called Magic Patterns, and it's been designed for teams that want to use their own component framework. So right now, the downside of prototyping is a lot of times you'll prototype something and it won't look anything like your site. And so one of the cool things about this product is you can pick a base set of components. You can do low fidelity wireframe, which is sometimes really interesting. So if you want to prototype something, you don't want people worrying about the visual details, you could set it to wireframe. It'll also use a couple of off-the-shelf component frameworks that are really popular, like ShadCN, Chakra, and Mantine. But you can also create your own preset, which is great.
I was just working with our creative team on the landing page for this show, and I sent them wireframe for the landing page with the copy using magic patterns, and they loved it.
Nice. It works really well. The code it generates is really nice as well. So I've had a great experience with it. So let's start out with prototyping something the way most companies or most product folks would go about it. And so let's imagine you're working at TripAdvisor. You want to create a new trip planning feature. One of the things you found out in customer discovery is people often plan trips with other folks. And so rather than just creating a single player trip planning feature, you want to create a shared trip planning feature where people can add things into the trip plan as well as talk about those things. So here's a typical prompt that you might use for something like that. Make a website for planning a Paris trip with multiple people, include some activities, hotels, and restaurants over 3 days, add user profiles, and let people comment on things. Make it look nice.
And just a quick note for people who might not have seen you do this little trick you just did. So you wrote a keyword and it changed it into this prompt. I think you're using text expander.
Yeah, so I'm actually just using the Mac native text replacements.
Right.
And so what's nice about that is you can create little macros and you type in the word, you hit tab, and it'll expand out. And then it syncs up across everything. So your desktop, your phone, they're great for your phone. So I have ones for my calendar information. I have ones to quickly reply. And I have ones for little prompts as well. So if I need to reply to someone, I'll just expand that into a prompt, use that in Superhuman, and it'll write a really nice reply.
Beautiful.
And so I think I have like 100 of them just now. Awesome. So we'll hit start. So Magic Patterns is going to go in. It's going to understand this prompt and start to build out a feature. And the result that we get will be pretty good. But I'm going to show how we can take it to the next level.
All right.
So you can see here how it's going through its thought process. This goes to some of the things that we were talking about earlier around thinking. So the fact that it is using language to do multi-step thinking, it's not a parlor trick. It's not just autocomplete. It's actually going from point A to point B. In this particular case, it's showing a dashboard for a 3-day trip to Paris. Got profiles for who's joining the trip. So it's doing a really nice job of thinking through what was our intention behind this spec. Another technique that a lot of people use is they'll take a short spec like the one that I had, and they'll ask something like Claude or ChatGPT to expand out that spec.
Right.
And that's also a great way of creating additional context.
I'm always talking about the prompt generator in Anthropic Console, which I think is like a superpower.
Fantastic, yeah.
You give it like a few words and it comes up with an actual super fleshed down high quality prompt. So yeah.
Yeah, you told me about that a couple months ago and I've been using it. It's great.
I love it. I also like a lot of these tools from a user experience point of view, showing you see here where it's saying modifying design and showing which file it's actually working on right now for people to, like, it's an interaction pattern. Like, we're waiting, but you can see something is happening. I almost feel like for the perception of people that are waiting, it just like changes that perception. Because if it didn't say anything, you'd just be waiting there, not even knowing whether it's working, right? And I think a lot of these tools are just like I've only seen this become a standard using on AI tools. Basically, it's saying I'm thinking, or this is the file I'm editing right now, or this is what I'm researching right now. Because otherwise, you just sat there not knowing what's happening.
And it's pretty interesting. Like most other tools, if you had to wait 10 or 20 minutes for something to happen, that would not be great. But here, the output is so good that you're willing to wait for it. And this little micro innovation of showing you what it's building and how it's building it makes the wait feel easier. And also, I think, gives you more confidence in the results. I mean, we can see here the files that it's creating. If someone has an engineering background, they'll see that this is pretty nicely componentized. And as a result, it looks like it's doing a pretty comprehensive build. And what's also nice about, I think in particular, Magic Patterns is it does a good job creating compartmentalized code. So if you do want to go in and do a little bit of light coding, it's a little bit easier to do that when you have all these components than when you're trying to work with just a few files. So here we have the output. And, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Plan your perfect trip to Paris. You can view your itinerary. It's got a little bit of information. You could see some of the activities. So going to Montmartre, going to Versailles. And then you can see an overview of the trip and who's taking the trip. There are a couple of problems though. The UX is not great.
It's a bit broken there.
It's one of the photos is broken. I also don't know what we're going to get if we hit view all, so we'll see. Okay, so if I do view all, I can go in and actually see a day-to-day breakdown, which is nice. But at the same time, we do have some broken photos. So this isn't quite ready to test with users. If I click on hotels, it's kind of weird that it just has day one and not the other days. But it's nice that I can be able to filter. And I think one of the nice things about using these tools is as part of building out your prototype, it'll come up with some feature ideas that maybe you hadn't thought of and you can incorporate back into your process. So pretty good output. But we can go a lot further through a technique that I've been talking about as data-driven prototyping. And so here we started with the functionality. We want to create a trip planning tool. The other way that we can start out with is to say, what is the data that's going to underlie this trip plan? And so I'm going to go over into Claude, and we will generate a prompt. So I just pasted in the prompt to actually generate data. So using JSON, generate a sample itinerary that I can use to prototype a shared trip itinerary feature. The destination is Paris. The itinerary should include an itinerary name, a cover photo, a date range covering 3 days. So we saw that Magic Patterns was able to do some of this for us, but now we're explicitly creating the data. There should be 3 to 4 travelers associated with the itinerary. Each traveler should include a first name, last name, avatar photo, preferred travel style like foodie or history buff. For each day, include a collection of things to see on that day. There should be 12 to 15 items in total. The item for hotel should be on day 1, and there should also be popular things to see like the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. Each item should have a name, a start time, a duration, a star rating, a number of reviews, tags to describe the item like historic sites and cultural landmarks, a photo, and a short description. Some items should have notes from one or more travelers. The notes should be in chronological order and respond to each other like a message thread for each itinerary item. One of the other things that I've done here is the photos that are in the itinerary are really important. And so I've added in an MCP server into Claude. An MCP server is a way that you can give Claude additional functionality. Here, the MCP server that I've added in is called unsplash-MCP server. This will allow Claude to be able to do a keyword query and get back the URL for an image from Unsplash. And so as part of this, it'll not only generate the data, but also the visuals. And it's pretty easy to install these. It was just kind of one line of code. I used a product called Smithery to install this for Claude Desktop. And as a result, we can get much better mock data. This approach where we're creating mock data works if you're creating a new feature and you don't have the data, but a lot of product people are actually going to have data that they can just pull out from their existing system. If it's something like Jira, you might have a project and a bunch of tickets. You can pull that in.
We actually have a MCP server for Claude. So
that's a great way. You can take that data out of Jira, maybe add some things to it, and then throw that into a prototyping tool to create a feature focused on 100% project management. So if I send it to Claude, it's going to start. The first thing that it's going to do, just create an overall plan. Like we were talking about before, it's pretty good about showing us the results. It's then going to actually search photos and come up with URLs for everything that it needs photos for.
Right.
So for each itinerary item, as well as the cover photo. And so rather than waiting for it to run, I've already run this previously.
I feel like I'm in a cooking show.
I know. I've already baked this.
Yeah,
it's in the oven. So we see the full plan. It searched for all these photos and then created this trip itinerary. And so now we have this really nice, very comprehensive, essentially database for a sample trip.
And you didn't specify what the schema for this data structure should be, right? You just asked it and it produced this.
Yes, and it produced it in one shot. All I did was give it this prompt that we talked about up front. The prompt has some ideas in here about ways to structure the data, but Claude was able to go in and say, no, we're going to create a JSON schema for this, and we're going to be really specific about it. So it's got the ratings, the review count, the start time, the URLs. And now I can copy this JSON.
Yeah.
We can go back into Magic Patterns. So Now my prompt is a lot simpler. Generate a trip itinerary feature based on the sample data below. I'll just paste in all the data. So we've got that all here.
And just for people watching this, am I in a new project in Magic Patterns? Is it the same project? Is it going to treat this as a brand new prompt?
This is a completely new project. And so we have our old project over here.
Okay.
It's really important if you're taking this data-driven approach to create a new project, because there's going to be a bunch of assumptions about the data that are going to be used in creating the prototype that it's important for the LLM to understand. It is possible to retrofit. So actually, it's a good question. Let me show you. So one of the things that Magic Patterns did is when it generated the code, it actually created a data file. And so it created some mock data here. Some of it's broken, like some of the URLs, but it took a pretty similar approach. And so if you wanted to replace the data and have it sort of work with that new data schema,
you could copy the data here into Claude and say, hey, could you just update? Yeah, right.
Yeah. It might take a couple of iterations. So I think it's better to start with the schema than it is to start with an existing project and then add that schema in later. So we've got that really simple prompt. I'll paste in the data and then have it generate. So similar to before, it's going to go in. Now it has a lot more context. It's got this really detailed schema, and it's going to build a feature around that schema.
All right. Did you see a difference in terms of speed when you tried this before? Like if you give it the context for the data schema, does it produce the prototype faster?
I think it's roughly the same. So for the first version, it took time because it needed to create the schema, and then it generated the data, and then it generated the UI around that data. Here, it has the data, so that shortens it. At the same time, you're going to see it's going to be a more powerful prototype. And so it does, given that it has that additional context.
It needs to process it and figure out how it's going to, yeah, that makes sense.
And here, this is a little bit more complicated a process, but in terms of what we've typed in, it's not that much more. We've typed in maybe an extra sentence to generate the JSON, and then we've used that extra sentence to generate the prototype here. But it's about the same amount of specificity and a much different result.
All right.
So there we go. We've got a trip itinerary feature built out from the data that we had. If we look at it, there's no missing photos because we pulled in those photos from Unsplash.
Yeah.
We've actually got a lot more detail. This feels like a much better result than what we had earlier. We've got the itinerary here. It's actually gone deeper into modeling what the person is going to do. So you've got day one is arrival and settling in. You've got day two is your art and history day. You're going to start with breakfast at Café de Flore, go to the Louvre, go on a river cruise. It's got all the time and duration in here. And then I can see really nicely there's comments from each of the different travelers talking about the specific activity. And so here, each one of these is actually generated really nicely in context. So Emma's saying, I've downloaded the Louvre app with the recommended routes. Should we focus on specific wings or try to see everything? Sophie says, let's do our highlights first. So it's much more realistic and powerful data.
Yep.
Next day is icons and heights. And there we go. We've got a really powerful trip itinerary. And I think this is a much better version than what we initially got because the data underlying it is more complete. And we can iterate on this. So I'll just do, I want to add blank cards if people have time in between activities. So let's see if having those open blocks in the day in the itinerary is actually a really nice feature to have. So we added in our free time cards, and we can actually see we've got a little bit of free time between breakfast and going to the Louvre. We got about 30 minutes. We've got an hour and 30 in the afternoon. And so we can start to really work on the specific functionality around this data set. And we've got a nice separation of concerns between the feature functionality and the underlying data. If we go into the code, it looks like in this case, it didn't actually pull out the data into its own file.
Right.
But I like to do that. And so let's say,
So this way, if you wanted to change the prototype, I'm assuming you could just go to the data file and change something directly in the data file versus changing, having to change another file.
Absolutely.
So it helps you focus on, how you want to work with it. And the data set applies to the whole prototype. So if you change, let's say, the name of one of the travelers, in all the screens, the name would change versus if the data was associated to the code for the front end itself, you'd have to go and change it everywhere.
Absolutely. And so it just makes the iteration process a little bit easier because it doesn't have to keep going back to the LLM for data changes. So we move that into a separate data file. You won't see any changes to the prototype itself. But if I go into here now, I can see data, itinerary data, and I can make changes to this data. So for example, this person doesn't look like an Emma. So we can just change their name to George, save. It'll reload the prototype, and then the traveler's name changed. I don't particularly love this cover photo. It's not very interesting. I can go to Unsplash, search up Paris. Let's see. Maybe we'll use this one.
It's a pretty good one, yeah.
Can copy the image address. Go over here, and I've got the cover photo. I can just change that cover photo. You just need to be careful to use the JSON properly. So I just fixed the JSON. Save. And there we have a cover photo. And what's really interesting about this approach is because you have a separation between the feature and the data, you can use a different data set really easily. So if we go back into Claude, this was a thread that I generated earlier. After I generated the Paris thread, I simply said to Claude, now generate an itinerary for the same travelers for a 4-day trip to Thailand. It had all the context from the previous generation, so it went in, it searched for photos, and it did all of the generation. And so here, I've now got an itinerary for Thailand. So Thailand Discovery Adventure, it's got Bangkok and Chiang Mai, and then you've got the same travelers, so it didn't change that data. But of course, all different destinations and a completely different itinerary. So if I go here, got to make sure that the JSON matches up. So I need all of this. Then I can go in here, paste in the new data set. It'll reload, and now we've got Thailand Discovery Adventure.
Love it.
Same set of travelers, different dates, and we've got our full Bangkok itinerary as well as Chiang Mai itinerary.
Love that.
Let me make this a little bigger. And so we can see the feature that we added, the free time, is a dynamic feature. So now it looks at the itinerary and sees we actually have an hour between arriving at our hotel and our welcome dinner. We've got different focuses on each day. So temple hopping and cultural immersion, traditional Thai breakfast. We've got different comments. So we can see what people are saying about the Wat Po temple. The history here is incredible. And so what's really nice about this is if I wanted to take that original prototype that we did for a Paris-based itinerary and change it to a Thailand-based itinerary, I'd have to do a whole bunch of prompting, and there may be other changes that happen along the way, and it's going to be a very time-consuming process. But here we've generated a prototype with a really nice separation of concerns between features and data, and we can independently change both of those and see how our feature works in various different circumstances, which is a much more realistic way to prototype a more complicated feature.
Thank you so much for introducing us to data-driven prototyping.
Yeah,
I mean, I
thanks
love
for having
seeing that. I think it's also like a twist on a lot of the AI prototyping I've seen so far. And I love the fact that, you can have the separation between the data and the UI itself. It seems like something that could be quite powerful in a lot of different contexts. So thanks so much for walking us through this. Before I let you go, we're going to do one of my favorite parts of the show, which is the rapid fire questions at the end. So I've got a few questions for you here. Before we close, I'd love to hear from you around 3 resources you would recommend any product manager listening to the show should be looking at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely check out the Reforge AI strategy program. We put a lot of heart into it, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. I I think number 2 is I really like One Useful Thing by Ethan Mollick. It's a great newsletter focused on AI. Ethan goes really deep into all of the latest models.
He's a professor, right?
He's a professor. I think he's a professor at Wharton. And he did a lot of really early work pushing the limits of what's possible with prompting. He does these kind of like tasting reports from the different LLMs.
He's always building a game. With like whenever a new model comes out, he's always building a game or like a 3D modeling piece of software. Like
yeah, he really pushes it. He does these simulations for his students,
Right.
And tries to get the LLM to actually run the simulation or run the game. And so it's pretty interesting to see what he's been able to build.
Okay, so Reforge program, Ethan Mollick, anybody else?
Yeah, I think another really good one is Peter Yang does a bunch of really good work on AI. He goes pretty deep, talking to a lot of people, has a lot of the latest things that are out there.
We love Peter's content. Right. What is one practice that you've developed that has most improved your product judgment or taste?
The biggest thing is being mindful of all the products that you use and thinking to yourself, what works well about this, what doesn't work well about this. It can be a water bottle or a backpack. I noticed over my career, the best product people just really love products.
Right.
They love researching products. They love finding great things. They love unique finds.
It's true.
And so being thoughtful about the world, I think especially outside of your core domain. One example is when I was at TripAdvisor, we wanted to understand how to implement better search and discovery to make it easier for people to find things to then add into their trip itinerary. And we looked at all the other travel sites and we were kind of underwhelmed by what they had available. And what we found a lot of inspiration around was Etsy and Spotify and to a lesser extent Amazon, because these were interesting products where people had to find things across a really large inventory of possibilities that match their pretty nuanced tastes and preferences. And both Etsy and Spotify were really interesting examples of how to do that and do it in a way that's very seamless and very interesting and enjoyable for the user and doesn't feel like a chore.
And last but not least, this is one of my favorite questions on the show. There's a BBC radio show called Desert Island Discs. It's been around for since after the war, basically. And the host basically asks this guest, usually a pretty famous person, to tell them if they were stranded on an island, what would be the 10 music records they'd take with them. We won't do that today. But I've got 2 similar questions. The first one is, if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only bring 1 book with you, what would the book be? And then the second question is, if you are on this desert island and you are guaranteed an endless supply of a single dish, just 1 dish, what would that dish be and why?
For the book, I'll give 2 answers. One is for something more professional. I love The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. I think it's more and more relevant based on what we're talking about with Gen AI. The fact that people are going to be creating more, the fact that taste is so important, makes it so that reading about the creative process, especially from someone like that who's been with so many different incredible musicians over his career, is really interesting. So I'd recommend that. I think for personal book, I really love The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. It's a really interesting story of immigrating to a new country. It's Indian American that comes over, has a kid here, and it's a story of their child and that person's experience. Absolutely beautifully written and one of the best books I've read.
I love that. To the most difficult question now, what about the dish?
The dish is actually easy. So both my daughter and I love, it's a Lebanese dish called shish taouk.
Yes.
And there's a great place in Seattle called Mediterranean Kitchen that has the best shish taouk that we've ever had. And so we always go there when we travel to Seattle. And I found a recipe and I'm able to create sort of a proximity of it.
It's not easy to I've had next door to where I live, there's a Lebanese restaurant and they specialize in manouche, which is like the bread on the dome, which is like the best thing. And anytime I taste shish taouk, I'm like, this must not be easy to make. So you'll have to give me your recipe.
It takes time. You have to marinate it for a couple of days, and you have to kind of focus on the grilling of it once it's done to make sure it's really tender. But I think if we could have that every day, we would.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you I learned quite a lot of things on this episode, so thanks for sharing all of this wisdom with us. If people want to engage or find you online, where's the best place they can find you?
Yeah, you can go to ravimehta.com. I've got a website there. I also have a Substack called Ravi on Product, and so you can find me there as well.
Brilliant. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.
If this episode helps you ship smarter experiments, share it with a product manager friend and leave a quick rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps. You'll find all the resources and full show notes at atlassian.com/Axel. That's AXEL.